This is a pretty simple start, but it's absolutely very crucial. I didn't put all this data up there, but here's the idea. The stride setup is going to be really important, and a lot of people don't get it right. So right away, one of the things that we measure, and you can do this just without any real 3D or anything like that, by just making some measurements, but a good lower body for a baseball swing, a good lower body stride is going to be about 3.5 to 4 times hip width. So if you make a measurement from hip center to hip center, whatever that is, and it doesn't vary a whole lot on adult males, but it will vary a little bit as you, if you look at younger kids and whatnot. But if you look at the measurement from hip center to hip center, your stride length should be 3.5 to 4 times. So let's just say right in the middle, 3.75 times hip width. And that's really important. If you overstride or you understride, you're going to greatly impact your ability to create torque effectively. And I won't go to this, but this comes off of a lot of research. And that research is published, and I'll give you links to some of that research as we move forward. But it's 3.75 times hip width. Okay? So that's really important. Direction is also important. It varies a little bit, but let's say on average, you want the stride to be closed at about 10 degrees. 10 degrees isn't a lot, but it's substantial. So you don't want the swing, the stride to be either directly forward at 0 or worse, open. Okay? You want the stride to be about 10 degrees. So if you look at a line drawn from the ankles to the ankles, you want the direction to be about 10 degrees off of the line that goes directly back to the pitcher. So you want it 3.75 times hip width in distance, and you want it 10 degrees closed in terms of direction. The front foot should be at a position of roughly 65 degrees. Okay? So if this is 0 and this is 90, pointing straight at the pitcher. So if this is 0 and this is 90, pointing straight at the pitcher, 65 is like that. So I've got a stride length from ball of foot to ball of foot, 3.75 times hip width. I've got 10 degrees closed, and I've got 65 degree foot position. If you look at the research, no matter what the style of swing is, that stride mechanism has very little variance. So no matter what an athlete's doing, they're getting ready to do all kinds of crazy stuff, when they put their foot down, that stride position is what I just said, plus or minus a few degrees, plus or minus a few percent in terms of hip width. It's very, very, very consistent. It's very important. So one of the things I like to do to start is to just map out, just draw right on the floor. You can have I literally have a map that I draw stuff out and I mark it off, and I say, get these people, get your athletes in this stride position. Back foot is essentially square to the line of action. Get them in the stride position so they feel it. And that's the stride position that we're going to use moving forward so that they get used to producing force, shifting weight, and creating interface from an effective stride position. So that one might be the most important thing you could possibly do. And it certainly is the sort of start point for the things that we want to do for all the other mechanisms. Okay, now, sitting counter. So, we're going to have a couple components here. So we're going to be sitting, and I'm using like a 75 centimeter Swiss ball. You can use a chair. You can use I think the Swiss ball is the dynamic stability ball is a nice way to go. But basically, what I want to do then is I want to get my feet in the position that I just described. I want about 3.75 times hip width. I want a few degrees closed, 10 degrees closed, I want a 65 degree foot angle. I want to get my feet in the position that I want my stride in. I want to lock down and I want to create interface. You can even do this in bare feet so they have a better feel for grip to the ground as long as they can create friction and they're not slipping on the surface. You don't want them slipping, you want them to be able to grip. But you want them in this position. All right? And then what we're going to do is we're going to teach them how to create the torque. But we're embodying all these other components. We're going to embody the interface. We're going to embody the relation, because we have a little bit of ability to move here. We're going to embody the relationship of center mass, center pressure. Even though we're not moving a lot, we're controlling it. okay? And we're then using those as the foundation to create torque, and then, but we're not going too much further than that in terms of translation in dynamic sense, but we're getting all those pieces of the puzzle, even the foundational part. This is allowing us to create a foundation. So what we do with this is we use this position to then create counter torque. So what we're talking about as far as counter torque is, what I want to do, and you can have the hands, you can put the hands up on the chest, you can sort of point to the shoulders, whatever, just get the arms out of the equation, right? You can even, at some point, have them grab a baseball bat and just kind of hold the bat, just kind of mimic more of the baseball movement. But all we want to do is, we want to create a separation where we've rotated the upper thoracic or the upper torso to some degree, it doesn't have to be a lot, but to some degree relative to the lower body. We want the lower body to hold position and actually create a counter torque moving this way. Even though I'm isometrically holding this position for the most part, and I'm not dynamically going through a swing pattern, I want to hold a counter torque to produce this rotation. So I'm in this set zone, right? So it's a kind of a ready position for hitting. And then what I want to do, creating this counter torque in my lower body and creating this separation here, is I want to then very slowly move back to a neutral. So what I've done is, so I've created this counter torque, and then I'm using the counter torque to create torso movement. So what I'm essentially, and what you'll find when you do this yourself, or you have your athletes do it, is in order to do this, you will see that they are shifting. And in fact, I'm doing a teaching seminar here in a couple days, and I'm going to do all this stuff on force plates and show people that even when I'm standing here, you're going to get the force production and the torque production that we're talking about, even though this seems really simplistic and non-dynamic. So what's happening is I'm creating that starting point, and I've shifted, even though I'm not moving center pressure, center mass a whole lot, I'm controlling that relationship, and then as I swing forward and do the connection, so as I swing my upper torso using this anchor as the lower body, I'm now creating, first I'm creating kind of the counter torque movement, and then I'm creating the forward acceleration dynamic, and then I'm stabilizing. So I'm creating all of the 5 components that I put down on my list by doing a really simple exercise. What you'll find though is even your high-level athletes, depending on what their issues are, but certainly your younger athletes, have no sense of being able to do this at all. It seems really, really simple, but it's not simple, and it's absolutely important as a stepping stone. And remember, when we create these programs, what we're essentially doing is we're sort of creating an environment much like children learn how to walk, right? A kid isn't born walking. A child doesn't just get up one day and walk. Even if it looks like they did it. They basically went through a process of gaining core control by being able to roll over, pick their head up. Once you're able to roll over and control your core dynamic, gain some core control, using the core then to move extremities, right? And that's where rolling over is the first step, and then holding your head up and maybe crawling a little bit to the next step. And you progress through these things. You don't just walk. So that progression is sort of what we're setting up here. So we want to have all 5 of the components embodied in a simple exercise that is essentially akin to a baby rolling over, let's say, being able to control the core and have some sense of the limbs and be able to facilitate that movement as that first step. So our first step there is our sitting counter torque is, again, create the counter torque. You're going to see the weight shifting underneath the feet, even though there's not a lot of dynamic, and then swing forward with the upper torso. So you're basically swinging forward, and now you're creating the forward dynamic that you want to see and the stability at the same time. You have all those components built up. So that's something that we might do so many sets, so many reps, start to build that foundation, start to build that neural control, that have the neural impact, and work through this part to then move to the next part. The next part is now a standing counter torque. So what I like to do is now let's go to a standing counter torque with lower body isolation. So I've chosen a smaller ball where I can actually put my feet at the distance I want them, and I can organize them in the stride position. So everything we do, we go back to number 1. Stride setup, stride setup, stride setup. We're not picking our foot up, we're not doing anything dynamic at this point. We're putting them where they should be, and we're working them from that position, taking that variable out of the equation. Okay? So, in this position, all we're doing is what we were doing was when we were sitting, we're using this ball as a cue to stay stable and to interact effectively as a foundation. And all we're going to do is create the counter torque, right? and then we're going to swing forward, right? Very simple. Create the counter torque, and then swing forward. So what we're doing essentially is the same thing we were doing when we were sitting. All the components are involved, but now we're standing. It's a little bit more complex, but it's a little bit more direct. Now the shear forces that we're creating at the lower body are now being translated more through the stacked limbs, right? Through the feet, the ankles, the knees, the hips, and we're creating more of this action. When we're sitting, we are creating that, but it's not as stacked, it's not as functional, it's not as close to the hitting mechanism as, say, for example, this activity is. So again, sets and reps of this, perfecting that, developing that sequence, and building to the next level. So we're going down this systematic approach. Now, let's get into the activity, but now without the ball. So now we don't have the cue, we get ourselves in the same orientation, but now there's a lot more ability to move in different ways that we don't necessarily want the athlete to do. So we emphasize the feel that we had when we were cued and isolated to create a counter torque and then to swing forward. So it doesn't look like here's the thing is that it doesn't look like I'm doing anything with my lower body. And you say, well, that's counterintuitive because we've been talking about lower body, we're trying to get our lower body to move more effectively, but yet in these exercises we haven't seen him move his lower body yet. Well, we're not moving the lower body, but we are creating all of the components for really effective movement when we do get to the point where we want to allow the athlete to now move dynamically. So in this basic program, as a starting point, most of it is lower body isolation or static. There's a little bit of movement at the end, but as we now say we progress over 3 to 4 weeks, 6 weeks, depending on the athlete and what's going on, we can then now move into more complex movements and start branching this stuff together and creating more dynamic and eventually move into speed. Okay? So you've got your standing counter torque with the lower body isolation, then you've got your standing counter torque with no isolation and having to sort of be cued on your own just to do it, right? Now, the next one is a dynamic movement, and it's really designed to set up the sort of the lower body, upper torso relationship, and I call it just a change of direction movement. I would start with an isolation, and then you can move away from it. You can always set your guy up in his stride position with this. And what I would do is you can take something simple, because you can have implements and you can go buy stuff, and there's all kinds of great training stuff that you can use, but might as well just use what you have, right? So you've got a baseball bat. Basically, just hold the barrel, all right, to minimize. You're going to hold the bat out in front. And to start, we're going to go big ranges of motion slow, right? So what we're doing is we're essentially moving about 60 degrees, let's say, to 60 degrees. And we're just going to move back, so one rep would be a full rotation, so that'd be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now, it looks like all I'm doing is moving my arms. So basically, if I turn from this kind of direction, what I'm doing is maybe like a 45. What I'm doing here is I'm moving my upper torso. But what you'll see is, in order to do that, as soon as I start to move the bat this direction, I'm creating a counter torque the opposite way. As soon as the bat starts moving this direction, I'm creating a counter torque the other way. So I'm creating a core differential, but really what I'm doing is sort of vibrationally, if you think of it, almost sinusoidally moving back and forth, creating that dynamic of connection, friction, center pressure, center mass relationship, torque or shear or horizontal relationship, and then facilitating movement out through the core. So we start to wake that part of the process up. The last thing that I would do in the basic program would be to then chunk this stuff together into an actual kind of swing pattern, right? So again, let's use our Swiss ball as a cue. We can now employ a bat into the equation. But really what we're trying to do is we're trying to create the same dynamic that we just did. We've woken the hips up a little bit, the pelvis up, and kind of do a little bit of dynamic in there to sort of wake that system up. Now all we're going to do is we're going to sort of chunk through or sort of segment the swing to create a swing pattern to sort of finish up this exercise series, but emphasizing what we just did in the first 3 or 4 exercises. So we've got our stride position. We create the counter torque with a good interaction, connection to the ground, and then we're going to close. So we're going to kind of close the action, and then from here allow the swing to happen into an impact bag. I just use like a heavy bag on a stand, but we're creating the movement that we want to see. So we're anchoring, we're connecting, we're creating all the lower body dynamic that we want, and then you can go ahead and the back. So now here you can actually create the contour, close the gap. Now what's good about that is that you can actually use that mechanism for not only training the action that we're talking about, but also start to work on fundamentals, in terms of technique, right? So you can add technique into the equation on this last bit, so you've got that progression. So that's a basic progression that's lower body specific, that is a starting point progression. So it's not only a basic in terms of we're only looking at PST or functional movement, but it's basic and it's starting, so it's where we might start with somebody and then obviously advance them as we move along. And we'll talk about some of that stuff as we go forward. Now, it is a little after